At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law raised her wine glass, laughed and called me the old witch in the tower. My son? He laughed along with her. Didn't say a word to stop it. I smiled, cleared the dishes and said nothing. But that night, I opened my estate binder, and by the end of the year I erased them both from my will. Let them decorate a kitchen they'll never own. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, the kind of aroma that should have softened edges and stitched a family together. Golden cornbread steamed in a cast-iron skillet at the center of the table, its buttery scent weaving through candle smoke. Wine glasses glinted under the warm chandelier, and for one brief second, Evelyn Hart thought the evening might pass without incident. Then Shayla laughed. That sharp, brittle sound cut through the room like glass breaking. "You know," she said, swirling her wine with a lazy wrist, "you're like the old witch in the tower, Evelyn. Always watching from above." The table stilled. Forks hovered midair. Adam blinked as if he hadn't heard her right, then gave an awkward chuckle, trying to sand down the edge of it. "She's just playing, Mom." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly, her face betraying nothing more than the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. She set her knife down with deliberate calm. "So noted," she said evenly. Across the table, Shayla smirked, mistaking composure for concession. She popped a bite of cornbread into her mouth, as if words could be swallowed as easily as crumbs. The conversation limped forward after that, but the air had changed. Evelyn caught the nervous speed of Adam's chewing, the way he drank more wine than usual. She watched Shayla dab at her lipstick, her posture smug, her phone lighting up. By the time dessert came, pecan pie cooling beside the whipped cream, Evelyn's silence had become its own presence. Adam kept glancing toward her, half pleasantly, half avoiding. Shayla chattered about home renovations, about countertops, and eventual property upgrades, as if she already held deeds in her manicured hands. Evelyn only nodded when necessary. She was too practiced to let rage surface at a dinner table. Years as a principal had taught her patience, the kind that lets an unruly child hang themselves with their own rope. When the plates were cleared and coats gathered, Evelyn stood in the doorway, thanking them in her measured, gracious voice. Adam hugged her stiffly, Shayla barely brushing her cheek in the air. Their laughter trailed off down the gravel drive. The old stone house fell into silence again, the fire popping in the hearth, shadows crawling up the walls. Evelyn stacked the plates herself, the scrape of porcelain echoing in the kitchen. She could almost hear her late husband's voice. "Don't let them rattle you, Evie." But he wasn't here, and the insult still clung like smoke. Her phone buzzed, a text lit up from Marla Best, her neighbor and lifelong ally. She said what? Evelyn stared at the words, a slow smile breaking across her face, not of amusement, but of recognition. Marla knew. Marla always knew. Evelyn typed back only exactly what you think. She poured herself a sherry, the glass cold against her fingertips, and carried it into her study. The walls smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. On the mahogany desk sat her estate binder, thick with decades of careful planning. Evelyn rested her hand on the cover, her pulse steadying. She had built this house stone by stone, memory by memory. She had taught children, saved money, buried her husband, raised her son. She had endured enough to know when words revealed truth. "Old witch," she whispered, tasting the phrase aloud. Not an accident, not a slip, a confession. Evelyn sat down, opened the binder and flipped to the page labeled heirs. Her neat handwriting listed Adam Hart and Shayla Hart in bold circled once years ago with confidence. She reached for her pen, the scratch of ink loud in the stillness. For a long moment she stared at the names, weighing blood against betrayal. The fire hissed softly in the next room, wind pressing against the old stone walls. Evelyn's eyes sharpened with resolve. Then, with one deliberate stroke, she crossed out two names from the column. The dining room still smelled of roasted chicken and spiced wine, but the warmth had gone out of it. Evelyn carried the heavy serving platter back into the kitchen, her hands steady despite the weight. The scrape of forks and the hum of conversation had vanished. Now there was only the faint clink of plates as she stacked them in the sink. Behind her, Shayla sat perched on a dining chair, phone glowing in her hand, thumbs moving quickly. She didn't glance up, didn't offer to help. The blue light reflected off her face, making her look cold, metallic. Adam leaned against the doorway, arms folded like a boy trying to seem older than he was. "Mom," he started carefully, "don't take it so hard." Shayla was just tired. It slipped out. Evelyn rinsed the carving knife under the tap, the water hissing as it hit the hot metal. She dried it with deliberate precision before answering. "Is that your explanation?" she asked without looking at him. "Or your defense?" Adam's mouth opened, then closed. He shifted his weight, eyes darting toward Shayla, who was too absorbed in her screen to notice. "It's neither," he mumbled. But he didn't say more. The silence stretched. Finally he pushed himself away from the doorway and muttered, "Forget it," before heading toward the front hall. Shayla stood, gathering her coat, still scrolling with one hand. They left together, their voices echoing faintly as they stepped into the cool night air. The slam of the door rattled the old stone walls. Evelyn stood very still in the kitchen, the faint scent of sage and butter clinging to her dress. She pressed her palms against the counter, feeling the chill of the granite under her skin. For years she had taught children to own their words, to understand consequences. Yet her own son had married a woman who could sling an insult at her table and walk away without flinching. She turned off the faucet, wiped her hands on a towel, and carried herself into the study. The estate binder waited there, exactly where she had left it. She pulled it close, the leather cover creaking softly as it opened. On the first page, under Distribution of Assets, Adam Hart and Shayla Hart were written in her crisp handwriting. Next to their names, all property, liquid accounts and holdings. Years ago it had seemed natural. Her only child, his spouse, security for their future. She traced the word everything with her fingertip, then reached for a red pen. Slowly, deliberately, she circled it. The ink bled into the page like a wound. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the old mantel clock. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, eyes sweeping the shelves around her. They held volumes of poetry, her late husband's legal tomes, photographs of her students' graduating classes. She had preserved so much. Why had she given so little thought to preserving herself? Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Marla, still fuming. "Want me to come over?" Evelyn typed back. "Not yet, I have work to do." She flipped further into the binder bank. Transfers neatly recorded, property appraisals clipped into plastic sleeves. Every detail accounted for, every future possibility mapped out, except one. The possibility that loyalty could sour into entitlement, that gratitude could rot into greed. She picked up her glasses, set them firmly on the bridge of her nose, and began drafting a note on her laptop. Her fingers moved with the ease of a woman who had typed up thousands of lesson plans, disciplinary reports, retirement forms. Each keystroke was calm, precise, inevitable. When she finished, she read the words once more, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she hit send. The email flew off into the night, its subject line simple and direct: urgent changes required. ASAP. The first sign came not through a letter or a phone call, but through a screen. Marla had sent Evelyn a screenshot from Shayla's social media page, a glossy photo of Shayla holding a wine glass, her nails painted a sharp scarlet, captioned, "Can't wait to upgrade Evelyn's old place someday." Quartz counters, finally, dreaming forward. Evelyn read it twice. Her jaw stayed still, but her pulse throbbed in her temple. Old place. Upgrade. Her house built stone by stone, each archway carrying the memory of her husband's hands. And here it was, reduced to a staging ground for Shayla's daydream of marble backsplashes and gold fixtures. That same afternoon, Evelyn slipped into her usual corner booth at the Mountain View Cafe. The air was rich with coffee and cinnamon rolls, the windows fogged from steam. Callie Rez, apron tied neatly, leaned over the table with a conspiratorial look. I shouldn't repeat things I overhear, she began, lowering her voice, but that woman, your daughter-in-law, was here with her friends this morning, talking about your land like it's a catalog order. Evelyn arched an eyebrow. Is that so? Callie shook her head. She doesn't deserve a petunia, let alone your garden. The way she laughed, Evelyn, it was cruel. Evelyn sipped her coffee. Steady. Noted, she said simply. Later that evening, Marla let herself into Evelyn's kitchen without knocking, her scarf still dusted with cold mountain air. She carried the printout of Shayla's post like evidence in a trial. You've been funding their lifestyle for years, Marla said bluntly. I've watched it, the vacations, the cars, those ridiculous spa weekends. Do you think any of that came from Adam's paycheck? Please. You've been their silent bankroll. Evelyn did not argue. She only turned, walked into her study, and unlocked the filing cabinet. From the drawer she drew two thick binders, bank statements and transfer records. She set them down on the desk and began flipping pages, her pen scratching notes on a legal pad. Line after line, transfer after transfer. 2,000 here, 5,000 there. Tuition for Shayla's certification course that was never finished. A down payment for Adam's consulting business that never launched. By the time she stopped, her hand ached from writing. She had a full page of loans, gifts and unreturned favors, each one neatly dated, each one unpaid. The old mantel clock ticked behind her, steady as judgment. Her phone rang. The caller ID lit up with Harold Lynn. Evelyn answered. I got your email, Harold said, his voice even as ever. If you're serious about this, we can shred the old plan and rewrite from the ground up. Trusts, wills, deeds, every line restructured. It'll be airtight. Evelyn looked down at her list, the red ink circling debts like scars. Yes, she said. Shred it. Good, Harold replied. Better to fix it now than watch it unravel later. When the call ended, Evelyn rose slowly, her back straight. She walked down the narrow hallway to her bedroom, the air cooler there, faint with lavender sachets in the drawers. At the far end stood her safe, a solid black box tucked into the wall behind a framed photograph. She pressed the code into the keypad, each beep echoing in the stillness. The lock clicked open. Evelyn reached inside, past velvet folders and a small jewelry case, and drew out a thick envelope sealed with wax. Inside was the deed, the original title to the stone house, their home, the heart of all her years. She laid it on the bedspread, running her hand across the embossed lettering. The house was hers, not theirs. Not now, not ever. The morning after she held the title in her hands, Evelyn stood in her study with the curtains drawn back. The mountains loomed outside, blue-gray and eternal, their ridges sharp in the crisp light. She had always loved that view. It reminded her of permanence, of things not easily moved. But permanence required protection, and protection required action. By 9 o'clock she was seated in Harold Lynn's office, a room that smelled faintly of leather and old law books. The blinds filtered thin stripes of light across rows of carefully labeled files. Harold, bespectacled and calm as ever, slid the title across his polished desk toward her. You're certain? He asked, his voice measured. Evelyn leaned forward, her palms flat on the folder. Absolutely. This house will not become someone's showroom. It will not be flipped, remodeled or staged for strangers. I want it out of their reach permanently. Harold nodded, his pen already poised. Then we'll convert it into a living trust. You'll retain all control until your passing, but upon that, the property will transfer according to the trust. Adam and Shayla will have no claim. Evelyn's gaze hardened. Good. That's exactly what I want. The papers whispered as they slid beneath her hand, signature after signature anchoring her intentions in ink. The pen glided steadily, every stroke a quiet defiance against entitlement. When it was done, Harold stamped the documents, the sound sharp and final. I'll file this under new trust protections, Harold said, collecting the pages. No loopholes, no challenges that will stand. Evelyn exhaled, a slow satisfaction filling her chest. But she wasn't finished. She reached into her purse and pulled out a handwritten note. I want this written into the trust as well, she said, sliding the paper across. Harold read aloud. Upon my passing, the Hart estate shall be converted into a nature retreat for disabled veterans, with perpetual care provided by community partnerships. He looked up at her, eyebrows raised. That's generous. It's justice, Evelyn replied. If Adam and Shayla can't respect what was built here, others will. By late afternoon, the documents were finalized. Evelyn drove home, the road winding through pines and oaks that had stood longer than her lifetime. When she pulled into her driveway, Marla was already waiting on the porch, wrapped in a green wool shawl, a bottle of wine tucked under her arm. Well? Marla demanded before Evelyn had even shut the car door. Evelyn smiled, a rare satisfied curve of her lips. It's done. They'll never touch this place. Marla let out a cheer so loud it startled the crows from the trees. About time. Come on, we're opening this. She thrust the wine bottle forward like a trophy. They sat in the rustic dining room, glasses filled, the fire in beside them. Marla raised her glass. To freedom, Evelyn. To finally cutting loose the leeches. The wine was rich and dark, warming Evelyn's throat. She savored it, letting herself just for a moment feel victorious. But victory never stayed unchallenged. That evening, Adam and Shayla sat together on their leather couch, the television humming in the background. Shayla scrolled through her phone, her tone sharp. Your mother's been different. Cold, don't you think she's declining? Mentally, I mean. Adam frowned. She seemed sharp enough at Thanksgiving. Shayla's smile was thin. Sharpness can turn to confusion quickly at her age. Maybe she's hiding it. We should be paying attention. Across town, Evelyn sat in her study again, recording her voice into Harold's secure file. The small recorder blinked red as she spoke. My name is Evelyn Hart. Today's date is December 2nd. My mind is clear. My intentions are clear. Any suggestion otherwise is a fabrication. This house will be preserved exactly as I've directed. End of statement. She clicked the recorder off. The silence afterward felt heavy, but it was the silence of resolution, not doubt. The house seemed to breathe around her, its stone walls steady, its history intact. For once she felt it belonged to her again, not as a burden but as a shield. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the quiet. A new text message lit up the screen. Adam, hey, can we talk about your will soon? The December morning carried a brittle chill, the kind that made the windows of Harold Lynn's law office glow faintly with frost. Evelyn entered in her tailored wool coat, every button fastened, her gloves tucked neatly in her handbag. She moved with quiet certainty, the way she used to when stepping into a classroom full of unruly students, calm but unyielding. Harold rose from behind his desk, the polished oak stacked with files. Evelyn, he greeted, shaking her hand firmly. You're ready then? As ready as I'll ever be, she said, setting her binder on the desk, like a general laying down a battle plan. The room smelled faintly of coffee and leather, the clock ticking with steady authority. Harold opened the file and slid the documents across. This will supersede all previous arrangements. Once signed and notarized, it will stand beyond challenge. Evelyn picked up the fountain pen, her hand steady. The first page bore Adam's name, her son, the boy she had raised through scraped knees and school plays, now a man who let his wife sneer across her Thanksgiving table. She studied the line where his name had once been printed as heir. With one firm stroke, she signed her way past him. Shayla's name appeared next, her daughter-in-law, eyes always flicking toward money, hands always clutching her phone, instead of reaching for a dish towel. Evelyn's lips pressed together. She moved the pen again, her signature a quiet slash across entitlement. When the ink dried, they were gone. Harold slid another page forward. Executor designation. Evelyn smiled faintly. That one's easy. She wrote Marla Best in crisp, unwavering letters. Her neighbor, her confidant, the one who knew Evelyn's strength even when others doubted it. The next line brought a small lightness to her chest. Caretaker rights for the property's future use. Harold read aloud. You've listed Callie Redis. Yes, Evelyn said firmly. She could see Callie's earnest face, her apron dusted with flour, her words sharp with loyalty. That woman doesn't deserve a petunia, let alone your land. Evelyn had taught her once, and Callie had remembered, that mattered. Callie will live here as caretaker, maintain the grounds and oversee the retreat. She deserves stability and she'll honor it. Harold nodded. Unorthodox, but strong. Evelyn leaned back slightly. Unorthodox is the point. Finally, Harold gestured toward the small camera set up at the corner of his desk. The red light blinked. Now the video confirmation. It's standard in contested estates, but I recommend it especially in your case. Evelyn straightened, clasping her hands together. Let's begin. The camera's quiet hum filled the room as Harold prompted, please state your name, today's date, and your intentions for this document. Evelyn looked straight into the lens, her gaze piercing. My name is Evelyn Hart. Today is December 4th. I am of sound mind and body. I have chosen to remove Adam Hart and Shayla Hart from my will and trust. This is my decision, made without coercion. My estate shall go toward the creation of the Hart Ground Sanctuary, a nature retreat for disabled veterans, with Marla Best as executor and Callie Redis as caretaker. My intentions are clear and final. She paused, then added with iron calm, this decision was born of truth, not bitterness. They called me a witch. So be it. I'd rather be remembered as one with clarity than as a fool with regrets. The silence afterward was powerful, filling the room like a gavel strike. Harold switched off the camera. That, he said, leaning back, is bulletproof. No court will touch this. Evelyn allowed herself the smallest exhale, almost a sigh. Good. By the time she returned home, the winter sun was low, casting long shadows across the stone path. She hung her coat, fed the fire, and poured herself a sherry. For the first time in years, the weight pressing against her chest seemed to lift. The house felt hers again. On the hall table sat a small stack of mail. She shuffled through utility bills and a church newsletter until she reached an envelope addressed in Shayla's sharp handwriting. The front read, Happy Birthday, Evelyn. Evelyn opened it slowly, her brows knitting. Inside was a glittery card with scripted words, wishing you joy and health on your special day. Tucked between the folds, however, was something else, a glossy brochure. She unfolded it. The cover displayed a bright photo of sleek modern kitchens. The title read, Blue Ridge Luxury Real Estate, Transform Your Home Today. Evelyn's hand tightened on the glossy paper, the corners digging into her palm. The real estate flyer still lay on Evelyn's desk, glossy paper catching the light from the desk lamp. She had stared at it long enough to feel its weight, as though it weren't paper at all but a declaration. Her daughter-in-law had slipped it into a birthday card, bold as daylight, as if her plans for the house were already written into stone. Evelyn picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. She typed without hesitation, Do not include me in your renovations. No extra words, no apologies, just the truth, concise as a verdict. She hit send, slipped the phone face down on the desk, and leaned back in her chair. The reply didn't come from Shayla, it came from Adam. Her phone rang within minutes, his name glowing on the screen. Evelyn let it ring once, twice, then answered. Mom? His voice was low, already defensive. She didn't mean anything by it. Shayla was just being enthusiastic. Evelyn let the silence stretch before she answered. Intentions don't matter, Adam. Impact does. He huffed, the sound sharp through the line. You're blowing this out of proportion. Am I? Evelyn asked quietly. She could hear him searching for words, and when none came, she ended the call herself. The house settled into stillness again, the old floorboards creaking as if they approved. She carried the flyer to the fireplace, fed it into the flames, and watched it curl into black ash. The heat licked at her skin, comforting in its finality. The next morning, a knock rattled her back door. When she opened it, Marla stood there, cheeks flushed from the cold, a small card in her mittened hand. The front bore a cartoon drawing of a woman snapping a broomstick in half, confetti exploding around her. Bold letters read, Congratulations on finally snapping. Evelyn laughed despite herself, the sound breaking the heaviness that had lingered since the brochure. You're ridiculous, she said. Ridiculously proud, Marla corrected, stepping inside and stomping snow from her boots. You've coddled them long enough. About time you reminded them who they're dealing with. They drank coffee in the kitchen, steam fogging the window panes, and for a moment Evelyn let herself bask in the rare comfort of being understood without explanation. Later that week, Evelyn stopped at the cafe for lunch. Callie approached with her usual warm energy, carrying not just a plate but her phone. I took this yesterday, she said, sliding into the booth and turning the screen. The photo showed Evelyn's back garden, sunlight spilling over late-blooming mums and the cedar archway her husband had built decades ago. Callie's camera had caught it in golden light, the flowers glowing like lanterns. It already looks like a sanctuary, Callie said softly. Evelyn studied the image, her chest tightening. Yes, she murmured. Yes, it does. That evening she returned to her desk. The estate binder was open, its pages growing heavier with revisions. She slipped in another edition, cease contact clause. It was a surgical cut. One herald had suggested if Adam or Shayla attempted harassment, any distant inheritance rights and residual accounts would vanish entirely. The pen glided over the page, sealing yet another boundary they would never see coming. When she finished, Evelyn closed the binder and set it neatly on the shelf. The house seemed to breathe easier, as if each clause she wrote scrubbed away the grasping fingerprints that lingered on its walls. But peace never lasted long. That night, as the fire burned low and the wind pushed hard against the shutters, Evelyn heard the crunch of tires on her gravel drive. Headlights swept across the stone facade of the house, blinding for a second before going dark. The doorbell rang. Evelyn pulled her robe tighter and stepped to the door, the old wood cool beneath her palm. When she opened it, Adam stood on the porch. His coat collar was turned up, his breath white in the night air. Beside him sat a suitcase, its wheels scuffed from use. Snow had just begun to fall, thin flakes dancing in the porch light, when Adam stood there clutching his collar suitcase by his side. His eyes carried that half-pleading, half-defiant look she remembered from his boyhood, when he'd been caught lying about homework or sneaking out past curfew. Only now the stakes were heavier. "Mom," he said, shifting on the step, "I just want to talk. That's all." Evelyn studied him for a long moment, her hand still on the door frame. Behind her the fire crackled, throwing a soft glow down the hallway. She could have sent him away. She wanted to, but a part of her also wanted him to hear, in no uncertain terms, what years of quiet enabling had created. "Come in," she said, evenly. "Leave the suitcase by the door." Inside, the house was warm, the scent of pine logs mixing with faint lavender from her linen spray. Adam looked around as though he were seeing it for the first time, his gaze catching on the stone fireplace, the framed photos, the heavy beams. Maybe he thought of it as his already. Evelyn gestured toward the dining table. "Sit. I'll make tea." He sat, drumming his fingers nervously on the wood. When she returned with 2 steaming cups, he leaned forward. "You've been cold lately. Distant. Did she upset you?" Evelyn settled across from him, folding her hands. Her voice was calm, precise. "Yes, she insulted me in my own home. She dismissed years of sacrifice with a smirk. She spoke of this house as though I were already dead. And you," she let her words hang, sharp as glass. "You laughed." Adam flinched, reaching for his cup, but not drinking. "You're taking everything too literally, Shayla. She runs her mouth sometimes. You know that." Evelyn didn't blink. "This isn't about one comment, Adam. This is about years." She began to recite, her memory unspooling like a ledger. The tuition check that disappeared into a failed business venture, the medical bill she paid without repayment, the countless transfers to cover emergencies that never ended. Birthdays where Shayla gave her scented candles while Evelyn paid off their credit card balance. Vacations they bragged about online, while Evelyn's savings dwindled. Each word struck with the weight of undeniable fact. Adam tried to interject, but she raised her hand, silencing him like a child in her classroom once again. You want to know why I've been cold? She asked, her voice low but sharp. Because I've finally stopped pretending your behavior deserves warmth. His cheeks flushed. He shifted in his seat. You've always been hard to please. Nothing was ever enough for you. Not when I was a kid. Not now. You expect perfection. Evelyn let a silence stretch, then leaned slightly forward. No, Adam. I used to be easy. Easy to use. Easy to guilt. Easy to fool. That's what changed. His jaw clenched, and for the first time he seemed to realize the conversation wasn't going to bend his way. Evelyn reached into a folder she had placed on the sideboard earlier. She pulled out a single sheet of paper, neatly typed, with dates and amounts listed line by line. She slid it across the table toward him. He stared at it, confused, then picked it up. What's this? Every debt I forgave. Every gift that was never repaid. Every instance where I chose silence instead of consequence, she said. It's a record of the cost of believing you'd grow into a man who valued his mother instead of her money. Adam's eyes moved down the page, widening as the total at the bottom came into view. His lips parted, but no words came. The fire popped loudly in the next room, the sound startling in the quiet. Evelyn lifted her teacup, sipping with deliberate calm, her gaze never leaving his. Finally Adam lowered the paper, his voice small, almost broken. Are we even in the will anymore? The firelight threw shadows across his face, making him look both older and smaller at once. His hand gripped the list of forgiven debts, the paper crumpling at the edges. Evelyn rose from her chair with a slow, deliberate motion. You want an answer, she said, her voice steady. She crossed to the cabinet in her study, the hinges creaking as she opened it from inside. She withdrew a thick, sealed envelope stamped with Harold Lynn's notary mark. She carried it back to the table and set it down between them. Open it, she instructed. Adam hesitated, eyes darting from her to the envelope, as though he were staring at a loaded weapon. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he broke the seal and unfolded the pages. His eyes scanned quickly at first, then slowed, his face draining of color. His name was nowhere. He flipped to the next page, then the next, searching for a footnote, a clause, a shred of acknowledgement. All he found was silence, where he had expected entitlement. Then he saw it. Shayla's name, but not as heir. The clause read, any challenge made by Shayla Hart against the validity of this will shall result in immediate forfeiture of all potential claims, residual or otherwise. Adam's lips parted. His eyes flicked up, desperate. You put her in only to forbid her. Evelyn folded her hands, her gaze unflinching. That's the fortune you insulted. That's the cost of calling me a witch in my own home. That is the line you both crossed and can never uncross. The fire popped in the next room, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Adam flinched as though the sound struck him. He pushed the will back across the table, his hand unsteady. This isn't fair, he muttered. You're punishing me for her words. Evelyn's eyes hardened. No, Adam. I'm punishing you for your silence, for laughing when you should have spoken, for standing by her side while she gutted my dignity. You may not have said the words, but you let them live in the room. His jaw worked, but no defense came. He looked down at the untouched tea, steam fading into the air. The room smelled faintly bergamot and wood smoke, but he seemed unable to breathe it in. After a long silence, he stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping against the wood floor. Fine, he said hoarsely. If that's what you've chosen, then that's who you are. Evelyn stayed seated, calm as a stone. And this is who you've chosen to be. He gathered his coat, leaving the suitcase untouched by the door. His footsteps echoed hollowly down the hall. A moment later, the front door shut with a thud that rattled the glass panes. Evelyn sat alone at the table, her tea cooling, her signature etched into the pages that lay between them. She lifted the cup, took one final sip, and set it down with deliberate care. Across the way, the porch light of Marla's house flicked on. Through the window, Evelyn could see her neighbor watching, arms folded across her chest like a sentinel. When Adam's car backed out of the drive, Marla stepped onto her porch, calling across the cold night air. "That went how I expected," she said, her voice carrying steady as the winter wind. Evelyn gave the smallest nod in return, before drawing her curtains shut. For a brief, rare moment, peace returned to the stone house. Evelyn poured herself a nightcap of sherry, the liquid glowing amber in the lamplight. She believed the storm had passed, that silence would follow Adam's retreat. But silence is never permanent in a war over inheritance. The next morning, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with the paper spread before her, the scent of coffee rising from her cup. Her phone buzzed with a notification. She opened it and froze. Shayla had posted on social media, her words slicing through the screen like ice. Old women with assets should be evaluated annually. The email from Harold arrived on a gray morning, its subject line stark: capacity challenge filed. Evelyn clicked it open, her heart steady but her jaw tightening. The words were clinical, but the meaning was venomous. Adam and Shayla had petitioned the court, claiming she was no longer of sound mind. Evelyn set her teacup down without spilling a drop. The steam rose, curling like a warning. When she called Harold, his voice was even, though she could hear the irritation beneath. "They've filed a motion suggesting you're mentally unfit. I've seen it before, Evelyn. It's ugly, but it's also easy to dismantle." She allowed herself a humorless smile. "They want to play doctor. Fine. Let's give them results they can't refute." The next day she sat in a clinical office, painted pale blue, the air faintly scented with antiseptic. The psychiatrist, an older woman with sharp eyes, conducted a full cognitive assessment. Evelyn named governors and presidents, recalled word lists backward and forward, solved math problems in her head, and drew a clock so perfect it could have been stamped. At the end, the psychiatrist closed her folder. "Your results are flawless. You're sharper than most people, 20 years younger." Evelyn nodded once. "I expected nothing less." Within the week, Harold marched into the courthouse with a stack of binders. The courtroom smelled faintly of dust and old paper, sunlight slanting across oak benches. Evelyn sat calmly in her navy suit, her back straight, her presence composed. Harold laid out the arsenal: notarized video testimony, medical records, the psychiatrist's report. Then he played the footage from his office. Evelyn speaking clearly into the camera. "My mind is clear. My intentions are clear." The judge, a woman with gray hair pulled into a bun, leaned back after just 10 minutes. She peered over her glasses at Adam and Shayla, who sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table. "This is frivolous. Case dismissed. Mrs. Hart is more than competent." The gavel cracked, sharp as a gunshot. Evelyn didn't so much as blink. Adam's face fell, Shayla's lips pressed thin, her nails scratching against the table. Outside the courthouse, the mountain wind stung cold against Evelyn's cheeks. Harold handed her a folder. "If you want, we can add something stronger to your trust. A deterrent." She raised an eyebrow. "Define stronger." "A no-contact inheritance penalty. If they attempt interference again, they lose even residual rights to anything else. Bank accounts, insurance claims, the smallest remainder." Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile. "Perfect. Add it." That evening Marla stormed into Evelyn's kitchen with grocery bags swinging from her arms. She wore a grin that reached her eyes. Victory deserves celebration. Evelyn arched an eyebrow. "What did you bring?" Marla pulled out teacups, a porcelain pot, and a cake from the local bakery. The frosting bore the words in careful script, "Still sane." Evelyn laughed for the first time in weeks, a genuine bubbling sound. They brewed strong tea, the scent of bergamot filling the air, and toasted at the table. "To sanity," Marla declared, raising her cup. "May yours last longer than their patience." They both drank, the fire warming the room, laughter spilling against the stone walls like balm. For a moment Evelyn allowed herself to feel invincible. But victories were never the end. They were preludes to new battles. The following week, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. Evelyn slid it open at her desk. Inside were copies of court filings, not hers, not Harold's, but Adam's. Her eyes narrowed as she read the bolded words. Adam had been sued by his business partner for fraud and breach of contract. And worse, his defense listed her name. Evelyn Hart, possible guarantor of funds. Her fingers tightened on the page, the paper crinkling under her grip. Adam had not only failed her, he had dragged her reputation into his collapse. The house, steady around her, suddenly felt colder. The papers lay spread across her desk, their black print glaring like an accusation. Evelyn's eyes locked on the line that made her chest tighten. Guarantor. Evelyn Hart. Her son had not only signed her name to his failing business loan application, he had tethered her reputation to his recklessness as if it were his right. Her breath was steady, but her hand curled into a fist on the armrest. After everything, the insults, the silence, the courtroom humiliation, Adam had chosen fraud. The phone call to Harold was brief but sharp. "He's forged me onto his loan," she said. There was a pause, the rustle of papers on his end. Then Harold's measured voice. "I'll contact the bank directly. Don't panic. This is survivable." Within an hour Harold called back. "Confirmed. He used your name without consent. The bank is willing to cooperate fully. If you file a fraud report, I'll prepare the paperwork." Evelyn stood at the window as she listened, the mountains framed in gray winter light. Bare branches scraped the glass like fingers, the house silent except for the steady tick of the mantel clock. She felt the weight of years pressing down, not weakness but clarity. Adam had crossed a threshold from selfishness into criminality. "Do it," she told Harold. "File everything." The next day Evelyn drove into town, the air biting cold, her coat buttoned to her chin. At the notary office, she signed affidavit after affidavit, her signature precise, unshaking. The smell of ink and paper filled the small room. She left with stamped documents in hand, her stride as firm as the stone steps she descended. That night, the phone rang. Shayla's voice burst through the receiver like static. "How dare you? Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined Adam's deal. You've ruined us." Evelyn didn't flinch. "I didn't ruin you, Shayla. Adam did, by dragging my name into something it never belonged to." Shayla's words dissolved into shrieks, a tangle of fury and accusation. Evelyn listened for exactly 3 seconds, then pressed the red button, and let silence reclaim the house. The bank moved quickly. Within a week, Adam's deal collapsed, his name flagged, his accounts frozen pending investigation. Harold updated her with cool efficiency. "You're clear, Evelyn. They can't touch you." Evelyn sat back in her study chair, the fire warm against her back. Relief didn't come with joy. It came with a weary kind of justice. Adam's ruin was no longer her burden. A knock came at the back door that evening. When she opened it, Callie stood there, cheeks flushed from the cold, holding a small bouquet of daisies and a paper bag that smelled of sugar and butter. "These are from the cafe's gratitude jar," Callie explained, handing them over. "Customers pitch in when someone's made a difference. I figured you deserve them more than anyone right now." Evelyn accepted the flowers, the petals cool and fragile against her skin. The cookies were warm through the paper bag. "Thank you, Callie. You have no idea how timely this is." "Oh, I think I do," Callie said with a knowing smile. Word travels. People notice when someone stands their ground. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn felt something she hadn't in weeks. Community wrapping around her like a quilt. The house smelled of daisies and fresh-baked cookies, the sharp edges of betrayal dulled by kindness. But peace never lasted long. 2 days later, as Evelyn sorted through her mail at the oak dining table, she found a letter with the seal of the small claims court. She slid it open, eyes narrowing as she read the printed words. Plaintiff Shayla Hart. Claim emotional distress. Damages sought $5,000. Evelyn lowered the letter slowly, her lips pressing into a thin, incredulous line. The fire crackled behind her, but her thoughts turned cold. Shayla wasn't finished. Not by a long stretch. The small claims notice sat on Evelyn's desk like a joke without a punchline. $5,000 for emotional distress. Shayla, who had tossed insults like breadcrumbs at Thanksgiving, now wanted compensation for her own cruelty. Evelyn might have laughed, had it not been so predictably pathetic. Instead, she dialed Harold. "It's arrived," she said, holding the letter like it was something foul. He didn't miss a beat. "Good. Then we respond. I'll prepare a countersuit. Defamation and harassment. She wants court. We'll give her court." The hearing arrived quickly, as small claims always did. Evelyn dressed in navy wool, her presence crisp and commanding. Marla came too, carrying a manila envelope. The courthouse smelled of disinfectant and stale paper, the faint squeak of shoes echoing in the tiled hallway. When the case was called, Shayla strutted to the plaintiff's table in heels that clicked like punctuation. She wore a somber black dress, her expression all wounded dignity. Adam trailed behind, his tie crooked, his face gray with worry. Evelyn took her place at the defendant's table beside Harold, her posture straight, her calm radiating like armor. The judge, a brisk woman with silver hair, asked Shayla to state her claim. Shayla launched into a performance, how Evelyn's erratic decisions had damaged her marriage, how the removal from the will had left her sleepless, traumatized by rejection. She dabbed at her eye with a tissue, glancing toward Adam for support. Evelyn remained silent. Harold did not. He rose smoothly. "Your Honor, if I may, we have documented evidence that this claim is not only false but malicious." He nodded to Marla, who strode confidently to the bench and handed over the envelope. The judge slid out glossy photos. There was Shayla at a downtown brunch just 2 weeks prior, wine in hand, laughing, leaning toward her friends with a smirk. The caption posted online read, "The witch didn't see this coming." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Harold's voice was steady. "This is hardly the portrait of a woman suffering emotional distress. This is defamation. This is harassment. And this is abuse of the court's time." The judge's expression hardened. She turned her gaze on Shayla, who shrank back in her chair, color rising to her cheeks. Adam shifted uncomfortably, staring at the table. "Plaintiff's claim is dismissed," the judge declared. "Further, Mrs. Hart will be awarded damages of $3,000 for malicious litigation." The gavel cracked, final and sharp. Shayla's head whipped toward Adam, her whisper a hiss Evelyn could almost hear. "Do something." Adam only sat frozen, shoulders slumped. Evelyn rose calmly, smoothing her coat. She did not look back. The following week, the $3,000 arrived as a check. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She drove it straight to the local women's shelter, the same one where she had once volunteered in her early retirement. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and fresh paint, the hum of children's laughter drifting from a playroom down the hall. "Use it where it's needed most," she told the director, handing the check across the desk. 2 weeks later, the shelter held a small ceremony. A brass plaque was unveiled above a freshly painted room, Heart Haven. Evelyn stood quietly at the back, her gloved hands folded as the applause filled the hall. For once her name wasn't a battlefield, it was a sanctuary. That night, Callie stopped by the house, her cheeks pink from the cold. She carried her phone, grinning as she held it out. "Look at this." On the screen was a photo Callie had taken earlier that day. Evelyn bent over her garden bed, planting daisies, the earth dark and rich in her gloved hands. Sunlight had caught her silver hair, turning it to a halo. Callie had captioned it, "Queen moves only." Evelyn chuckled, shaking her head. "You make me sound mythic." "You are," Callie said. For a moment the house felt light again, filled not with battles but with roots taking hold. But the war wasn't finished. That evening, as Evelyn poured herself a glass of sherry, the voicemail light blinked on her phone. She pressed play, and Adam's weary voice filled the room. "Mom, it's me. I am being evicted. I don't know where else to go." The knock rattled the heavy oak door just after dusk. Evelyn set down her book, the fire casting orange light across the room, and went to answer. Through the frosted glass pane, she could make out the hunched figure on the porch. When she pulled it open, the cold night air swept inside, stinging her skin. Adam stood there with two boxes stacked against his legs, and another clutched in his arms. His coat was zipped halfway, his hair damp from sleet. He looked older than his 42 years, drawn, gray, desperate. "Mom," he began, shifting the box awkwardly. "They came there, Zed. They're evicting me. The landlord changed the locks. I didn't know where else to go. Just let me stay a while." The words were half plea, half demand, and Evelyn felt the weight of them pressing against her ribs. Behind him, the mountains disappeared into night, their outlines sharp against the moonlit sky. She didn't move. "Adam," she said softly, "you've mistaken proximity for love." He blinked, confused. "What? Being near me isn't the same as being with me. You want shelter, not reconciliation." Her hand tightened on the edge of the door, her voice steady despite the ache behind it. "I have given you shelter your whole life. Tonight I give you honesty." The silence between them stretched, filled only by the wind rattling the porch rail. Adam's face twisted, hurt, then angry, then hollow. "You'd let your own son freeze out here?" he demanded, voice cracking. Evelyn's eyes did not waver. "I'd let my son learn." Slowly she began to close the door. His eyes widened, but he didn't step forward. He simply stood there, the boxes at his feet, as the door closed inch by inch until only a sliver of his face was visible. Then it shut with a muted thud, sealing him, and all the years of entitlement outside. Evelyn leaned against the wood for a moment, her breath shallow. The house was warm behind her, yet the act left her trembling as though she had stood out in the snow herself. The next morning, she found a small pot of soup waiting on her back steps, steam still clinging beneath the lid. A yellow sticky note was taped to the side, Marla's looping handwriting bold and certain, "Proud of you." Evelyn smiled, despite the heaviness. She carried the soup inside, the scent of chicken and thyme filling the kitchen as she warmed it on the stove. For the first time in weeks, she ate slowly, savoring each bite, as if strength itself had been ladled into the bowl. But the ache lingered. That evening, she sat at her writing desk, the lamp casting a soft glow over crisp stationery. She uncapped her fountain pen, and began a letter, not to Adam, but to Miles, his teenage son. "My dear Miles," she wrote, "someday you'll hear stories about me, some kind and some cruel. I want you to know the truth. I loved your father fiercely once, but love without respect cannot survive. Every choice I've made has been to preserve dignity, not to withhold it. You will always have a place in my garden, should you wish it. This house, this land, this legacy, it was built for integrity, not greed. Remember that. Carry it forward." Her handwriting was steady, her words measured. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it. She walked down the hall to the cedar chest she called her legacy box. Inside were documents, photographs and mementos she wanted preserved after her passing. She tucked Miles's letter inside, resting it atop the others. The lid shut with a quiet finality, as though the box itself approved. The next afternoon, Evelyn sat in her sunroom with tea, the winter light thin against the glass. Marla phoned with a scrap of news, her voice tinged with equal parts glee and disbelief. "You'll never guess where I saw Shayla today," Marla said. "The bank, not with Adam alone. Filling out job forms." Evelyn's brow arched. "Job forms." Marla gave a satisfied hum. "Under her maiden name." Evelyn set down her teacup, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. Outside, the garden lay quiet under a dusting of snow, but something sharp stirred beneath the surface. Shayla wasn't retreating, she was rewriting herself. The plaque arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, sealed in brown paper and stamped by the notary. Evelyn opened it slowly, her fingers brushing over the embossed bronze letters. "The Heart Ground Sanctuary." The metal caught the afternoon light streaming through her study window, gleaming like a crown. She carried it out to the garden herself, the cold air sharp with pine, the earth smelling faintly of frost. The cedar archway stood waiting, its beams weathered but strong. Evelyn knelt carefully, pressing the plaque into its base, anchoring her name into the soil where no one could erase it. "This land has a future," she whispered aloud, her breath misting, "and it will not be theirs." By Friday, the town newsletter announced the dedication. Locals stopped by to congratulate her, voices warm with approval. At the cafe, Callie poured her coffee on the house, the air sweet with cinnamon rolls. "It feels right," Callie said, sliding a saucer across the counter. "Everyone's talking about it. Like you've built something that belongs to all of us." Evelyn only smiled, though inside she felt a rare swell of peace. The sanctuary wasn't just protection, it was legacy. Meanwhile, Shayla's reinvention cracked in public view. Word spread quickly that her maiden name application at the bank had been politely declined. Soon after, she applied for 2 community boards, one in housing, another in development. Both rejected her, citing misalignment of values. Marla arrived one afternoon, scarf wrapped tight against the cold, carrying the town paper under her arm. "Front page of the local section," she said, laying it on the table. Apparently they don't want her touching anything community-related. Can you imagine? Shayla, cut out of the very place she wanted to sink her claws. Evelyn lifted her teacup, inhaling the bergamot steam. "Poetic," she said simply. But the most unexpected ripple came from Miles. Weeks earlier, Evelyn had tucked a letter to him into her legacy box. Quiet words meant only for him. But when Miles visited during a school break, he read it and asked her permission to share it. "Grandma," he'd said, his teenage face serious, "people need to hear this. It isn't just about our family. It's about dignity." So Evelyn agreed. Now the letter appeared in the Asheville Chronicle, printed in full under the title, "A Grandmother's Willpower." In it she spoke not of money but of respect, of boundaries, of the quiet strength it took to say no to those you love when they mistake love for ownership. By Sunday morning the article had gone regional. Online shares spread quickly. The hashtag #GrandmothersWillpower trended. Women across the county, retirees, mothers, widows, commented about drawing their own lines, about standing their ground. Evelyn's inbox filled with messages she never expected. "Thank you for giving us permission to protect ourselves." Marla nearly burst through the door with her phone in hand. "Evie, you're trending," she crowed. "Do you know how rare that is for someone our age? You've become a movement." Evelyn chuckled softly, but her eyes gleamed. "I didn't mean to start a fire," she said. "Well," Marla replied, setting down a bottle of wine, "sometimes fires are what cleanse the field." That same week, the Asheville Women's Council called. Evelyn was invited to sit on a panel about legacy, resilience, and financial independence. The meeting hall buzzed with women of all ages, the air thick with perfume and the smell of catered coffee. Evelyn wore a deep green suit, her voice steady as she spoke about protecting one's worth, about ensuring that inheritance was a gift, not an entitlement. Applause thundered, echoing through the vaulted ceiling. For the first time, Evelyn felt that her years of discipline and quiet backbone were not just survival, they were influence. She returned home that evening, weary but content. The fire burned low, shadows dancing against the stone walls. She poured herself a small sherry, the liquid amber in the lamplight, and sat down with her book. The phone rang. She let it ring twice before answering. On the line was a measured, professional voice. "Mrs. Hart, this is David Lang from the Mountain Legacy series. We'd like to feature your story, your life, your choices, your sanctuary in our next issue." Evelyn froze, the glass halfway to her lips. The story she thought was private had become a beacon, and now it was about to go public in a way she had never imagined. The glossy cover of Mountain Legacy gleamed in Marla's hands as she rushed across the snowy lawn, waving it like a prize. "Evie," she shouted, her voice carrying through the crisp morning air, "you're on the front page." Evelyn opened the door just as Marla bounded up the steps. There it was, her own face, in full color, seated beneath the cedar arch of her garden. The photograph captured the winter sun spilling across the soil, the plaque reading Heart Ground Sanctuary glinting proudly behind her. Her silver hair shimmered, her expression composed but warm. Inside, the two women sat by the fire, the scent of cedar logs filling the room. Evelyn traced her fingers over the article's opening lines. She was called a witch. She chose to become a sanctuary instead. Her chest tightened, not with regret, never that, but with the strange ache of seeing her private resolve turned into public story. By afternoon, copies of the magazine had spread across Asheville. At the cafe, Callie propped one inside a wooden frame and hung it near the counter. Customers paused to read as they ordered lattes and pecan scones. Callie snapped a photo and posted it with a caption, "Our queen, our teacher, our legend." Marla, unwilling to be subtle, left her own copy open on the front step of her porch, its pages fluttering in the wind like a banner. Passers-by slowed to look. Some nodded, some smiled, a few even clapped. Evelyn could see it from her window, her neighbor turning her life into a victory parade. For Adam and Shayla, however, silence spread like ash. Within hours of the magazine's release, Shayla's social media accounts vanished. No photos, no posts, no captions dripping with ambition. Her glittering online persona evaporated, leaving nothing but absence. In town, whispers floated. Some said she'd been rejected from yet another committee, others that she was trying to rebuild under different circles. But everywhere Evelyn went, the narrative was no longer Shayla's to tell. Adam's retreat was quieter, almost pitiful. He relocated to a dim studio apartment near the outskirts of town. Word reached Evelyn through Marla, who heard it from a cousin of the landlord. "Single mattress, no heat, worth a damn," Marla reported, her tone caught between disdain and pity. For a man who once thought he'd inherit stone walls and mountain views, it's a far fall. Evelyn only sipped her tea. Falls are sometimes necessary. But it was Miles's words that pierced through the noise of gossip. One evening, Evelyn found an envelope in her mailbox, addressed in his careful handwriting. She carried it inside, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside was a single note. "Thank you for never letting her define you. I'll never forget it." The handwriting was unsteady, the letters of a teenager still finding his way, but Evelyn read it 3 times, her throat tightening. She tucked the note carefully into her legacy box, laying it atop her letter to him. The boy had seen her not as the villain Shayla painted, nor as the enabler Adam wanted, but as something steadier, an anchor. That night, Evelyn sat in her garden despite the chill. The air smelled faintly of damp soil and wood smoke, the mountains silhouetted under a pale moon. She breathed deeply, the cold air sharp in her lungs, and let herself imagine the sanctuary in bloom come spring. Not a dream, an inevitability. The world was seeing her story now, reshaped into truth. She was no longer the caricature of a bitter matriarch. She was proof of endurance, of boundaries held firm. But triumph, she knew, was never the final page. It was always followed by another chapter. A week later, as Evelyn sorted through her mail, her hand paused on a thick envelope stamped with the town seal. She slid it open with her letter knife, the paper whispering as it unfolded. Her eyes scanned the bold print. "You have been nominated for the Asheville Civic Legacy Award." Evelyn's hand stilled on the page. The woman once mocked as the witch in the tower had just been named a pillar of her community. The spring air carried the scent of damp earth and blooming lilacs as Evelyn stepped onto the flagstone path of her garden. The sanctuary was alive now, truly alive. Bees hummed lazily between blossoms, the soft chatter of visitors drifted like music, and the soil she had once turned alone was being tended by many hands. Ahead, Callie knelt beside a row of planters, her gloves dusted with rich soil. Beside her, Miles pressed tulip bulbs into the earth with careful precision, his brow furrowed in concentration. The boy had grown taller over the winter, his shoulders broadening, his hands steady. "Don't crowd them," Callie teased gently, adjusting one of his bulbs. "Give them room to breathe." Miles smirked, brushing dirt from his palms. "Grandma says the same thing about people." Evelyn smiled at that, her cane tapping lightly against the stones as she walked closer. The garden was no longer a battleground of memory, it was a place reborn. Rows of early spring flowers lined the beds, bright green shoots breaking free from the thawed soil. The air was warm, carrying the mingled scents of tulips, fresh mulch and cedar wood. Marla sat on a bench nearby, a book open in her lap. She read aloud passages from Wendell Berry, her voice carrying like a hymn across the garden. The words about land and belonging drifted through the air, steady as a heartbeat. Evelyn eased into her favorite chair beneath the cedar archway. The beams, once weathered and worn, now framed the entrance to something greater than she had ever imagined. The plaque gleamed at its base, the heart-ground sanctuary. She leaned back, the wood cool against her shoulders, the sun warm on her face. Around her, life moved gently. Collie's laughter, Miles' steady work, Marla's voice. A small group of children wandered down the path, their sneakers crunching against gravel. One little girl stopped before the plaque, her pigtails swinging as she traced the engraved letters with her finger. "Who's Evelyn Hart?" she asked. Miles wiped his hands on his jeans and stepped closer, his voice proud but soft. "She's my grandmother. She built this for everyone." The girl's eyes widened. She must be important. Evelyn closed her eyes at that, her chest swelling. She had been called many things in her life: principal, widow, mother, witch. But important in the right way, was the one title she had never chased but had finally earned. She listened to the garden instead of speaking. The sound of shovels digging, the rustle of pages as Marla read, the distant giggle of children weaving between flower beds, the faint hum of bees, the whisper of mountain wind, the steady rhythm of life moving forward without demand, without greed. The soil beneath her feet was no longer just property, it was legacy. It carried no promise to Adam, no entitlement to Shayla, no debt left unpaid. It carried only what Evelyn chose to plant, and what others chose to nurture after her. She rested her hands on the arms of the chair, breathing deeply. The mountain air filled her lungs, cool and fragrant. Her eyes stayed closed, not out of weariness, but out of peace. She thought of the path she had walked, the slights endured, the boundaries drawn, the consequences signed into permanence. Shayla had wanted money. Adam had wanted convenience. Neither had wanted Evelyn herself, and so she had given them exactly what they sought. Nothing, a mirror, reflecting only their hunger back at them. What remained was hers. What remained was true. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, as she let the warmth of the sun rest on her skin. "They called me a witch," she whispered into the air, her voice steady as stone, "so I conjured a future without them.